Hi, welcome to Brilliance and Blunders Part 2 from the U.S. Amateur. This is Steve Farmer, your host as always. And in this game we join it at move 10. Matt Noble is playing white. He's rated 1946. Matt was my favorite to win the amateur this year, but didn't quite do it. And Joe Lafornara, rated 1806, has the black pieces, and he's playing a French defense against the guy that plays the French defense. Not a good idea. Of course, I don't recommend the French in the first place, but, you know, that's beside the point. Alright, so Matt plays knight h3, which I think is the right idea here. And now f5. Pawn takes en passant. Rook takes. Queen to h5. h6. Queen e8 check. Rook f8. Bishop h7. King goes up, and he takes the rook. And now, believe it or not, if he had played, he did not play this, if he had played c takes d4, I think black is still very much in this game. It may not seem like it. And it's worth investigating if you get into this line. Let's pop back to the very beginning. What we have here is a line of play where black has castled, and he usually, theory until a couple of years ago was telling us you play king to f8 instead of castling. But with the aid of modern computers, it's telling us that black can castle. He has some resources, and this is one of those such positions where c takes d4 leads to complicated and somewhat equal play. But Joe played queen to a4 here. Now, quiz time. White to play and win. See what you can come up with. Study this position for a little bit. Hit pause. Take a good look at it. When you're satisfied with your answer, hit play, and we'll see if you stack up well with what Matt played. Okay, hopefully you saw the move that Matt saw, and he played knight to g5 check. This is a beautiful move. And these are the kind of moves where you could lose all the other games in the tournament and still look back at this one and go, oh, that was sweet. But it's a total bust for black here. He can't go to g6 with his king, because queen f7 is mate. So it's forced. So that made the variation a little easier to calculate. Pawn takes, now h4, but he can just push, which he did. h5, and now knight to f5 was played in the game. We'll come back to this. It's interesting to note that bishop to d7 is a bizarre and interesting try, but it doesn't quite work, because after queen takes rook, you think that you can just slide the bishop back and the queen is trapped. Alright, so black is down 2 exchanges, but the white queen is stuck over on a8. However, it's not that easy to keep her there. Castles, pawn takes, queen takes, and now bishop to b4 is going to lop off one of those knights in one way or another, and the queen will escape. So black does not get enough out of this line, though it was a very interesting try. Another alternative here would be to play knight takes d4 right away, returning the material, h6, knight df5. But this also falls short because a pawn takes with discovered check, king to g6, promote to a queen, sadly, not a bishop. A bishop wouldn't work. Knight takes, queen on g8, queen takes, king f6, queen h8, king e7. You got a bit of a king hunt going on here. Rook h7, king to d6, queen to f8, and he cannot play king to c6 because queen to e8 check, king to b6, and we take the queen. That's clear enough. So after queen f8 check, he has to come forward to e5. And here, a really nice move would be to castle and then play rook to d1 and continue with the mating attack. But another way to go about that, and not allow, like if you castled, queen takes a3 check, is to play f4. This is a really nice move because after g takes f3, we don't retake the pawn, we go king to f2, we're ready to bring the rook to e1. So queen takes c2, rook to e1, queen e4, and now pawn takes, and it's all over. Black's going to have to give up his queen for the rook, and his king is still stuck in the center. So bishop to d7 was an interesting try. Knight takes d4 allows a really nice king hunt. I'm sure that Joe spent quite a bit of time on this position, and he came up with knight f5. But now h6 and g6, queen f7 check, king h8. And now Matt must have already seen a mate in his mind, and he plays h7. If we step back, another way to go about it is with bishop to g5. And how's he going to stop bishop to f6? He cannot. But Matt already had something in mind, and he played h7. Bishop to d7 stops the immediate mate. Queen to f6. Knight to g7. Now bishop to h6. And Black resigned at this point. He did not want to see what would happen after rook to g8. Bishop takes g7. Yes, taking on g8 would be one move quicker, but rook takes g7, queen f8, rook g8, pawn takes rook, equals rook, checkmate. Our theme is under promotion, if you haven't guessed it by now, for this tournament. And I can only imagine him going to his shrink and saying, yeah, he mated me with 3 rooks at move 26. Doc, can I have another hour? Alright, let's move on to the next fragment. In this fragment, we join the game of Maury Holland, rated 1795, playing white, against Kevin Shore, who's rated 1553. Okay, so the rating disparity would say that Maury's odds-on favorite, and we join this game at move 10, where h5 is played. And now, the losing move by Kevin was played at this point when he played rook to e8. A harmless looking move, isn't it? But let's step back. Black needed to realize the danger that he was under. White's ready to castle queenside and bring another rook in onto the attack on the king side and throw his pawns up the board. So it's looking pretty hairy. So with that in mind, a really committal move like f6 has to be tried. This gives the king at the f7 square the ability to bring the rook to defend the G or H files if he needs to, possibly to bring the queen over to f7, or to move the queen out of the way and play knight to d8 to f7. A lot of different options depending on what white does. White, to me at least, is clearly for choice here, but there is no immediate attack in this line. Going back to our game though, after rook to e8, Maury is well versed in finding really tactical solutions to things, and he plays h takes g6, knight takes, bishop takes on g7, king takes, queen comes up with check, now king to g8. If he goes to f6, he gets into trouble of a different sort after e5. We want to bring the knight to e4, or maybe the bishop. Knight c takes e5, f4, knight c6, knight checks. Now if king to f5, bishop h3 is mate, so he wants to avoid that by going king to e7, queen checks on g5, and after king to d7, knight f6, well, we're picking up the exchange, and this seems eerily similar to another game that we looked at. Yeah, this is just absolutely winning for white. White's up to full exchange and is ready to castle and throw another rook into the fire there. Back to our game, instead of king to f6, he tried the more conservative approach of king to g8. Now knight f3, getting ready to come to g5, queen to c7, and now queen to h7 check. And as the saying goes, now Maury has the pawn and the compensation. King f8. Now Maury plays knight to h4. Let's step back for a moment, and we'll give you a little quiz time here. White to move and win. Find the most forcing line for white. Go ahead and pause the video and come up with a plan, and when you're ready, hit play, and we'll see what we got. Okay, hands down, the best move here is rook to h6. We're threatening simply to take on g6 because the queen on c7 is loose, so he couldn't recapture. So he's got to do something, and moving the queen seems to be the best move. Now we go ahead and take the knight anyhow. And after f takes g6, we don't take it. We go queen to h6. Check. And what's the point here? Well, if king to e7, the quickest thing to note here is queen to g7, mate. Again, very similar to a pattern that we saw in another video. Or if king to f7, then you have knight coming in with check. King to f6, now e5, clearing the way for the knight or the bishop. Knight takes e5, knight c to e4, king to f5, bishop h3, knight to g4, bishop takes. Now if king takes, we got queen to h3 mate. So he can't do that, but he can play king to e5, sad as it may be. Now c4, we're cutting off all the routes for the black king to escape, and we're threatening mate with knight to f3 or queen to g7, and both moves cannot be stopped. If rook to g8, guarding the g7 square, we got knight f3 mate. And if rook to f8, stopping knight f3 right away, we have this little intermezzo with queen to g7 check. The king has no moves, so a piece has to go to f6. It doesn't matter which piece. And now knight to f3 is checkmate. Pretty cute, huh? Okay, so we've looked at king to f7 and we've looked at king to e7, and king to g8 should just make a lot of sense to see that queen takes g6, king f8, and now castling is going to be decisive. Again, king e7, queen g7 is mate, and the threat of rook h1 to h8 is very difficult for black to deal with. White's easily winning this. But back to our game. Mori played knight h4. Now knight c to e7 was played. This may not be the best defense. He could have tried knight takes h4, queen checks, king runs away, takes with check, king to d7, and castles. White is a pawn up, but at least in this line he's only a pawn up. White should feel very good about his winning chances, but he's only a pawn up compared to some of the lines we just saw. Back in our game, though, Kevin had played knight c to e7, and now Mori castles. Okay, this is still winning. And there's a saying in chess, candy is dandy, but liquor is quicker. Oh, wait, that might not be chess. Okay, anyhow, White had a quicker way to go about things here. Instead of castling, he could have played queen h6. Where's the king going to go? He's pretty much trapped. King here, knight takes, and now e5. And we can either bring the knight to e4, or more importantly, in this position, the bishop. So if he tries to stop that with d5, then we can go rook to h5, b5, and now castles. And very simply, we're going to double on the h file and win the game by brute force. Back here again after e5. If he played d5, we just looked at that to stop the bishop from coming in. If he goes d takes e5, we bring the bishop in. We're threatening mate in 3. Bishop takes knight, queen h8, rook h7 type things. So f5, just giving up the knight, but he's attacking the bishop at least for right now. And now if king to f8, rook h8, king comes up, rook takes e8, king to here, knight to here, check, king to d7, and we mate on e6. And instead of king to f8, he tries queen to g7, queen takes rook, queen to f8, rook h8, and it's all over. White castles, and it's going to be mate in just a couple moves here. Back to our game. Mori in this position castled, which is fine. White's still doing very well. He's a pawn up. Even if his attack does not come through, he's still got a very promising endgame to look forward to. Plus, black's still all bottled up. So b5, rook df1. Now note that queen to h6 check was still a killer. b4, knight to d1 was played. Again, queen h6 is still a killer. a5, f4, a4, now f5, Again, queen h6 was still a killer. ef5, ef5, and now knight to e5. It does him no good to play knight takes f5 because a knight takes g6, f takes g6, queen takes c7. With material gains and mate to come, it's like having your own room at the Rhino Bar, or the Camus Towers for that matter. Knight to e5 was played in the game, now queen h6, he finally gets the move in, king g8, f6, has some kind of threat I'm sure, like queen to g7 mate, so knight f5 stops that, but rook takes f5. And I guess all roads lead to Rome. He could have played queen h8, and after king takes, knight g6, king goes here, and rook h8, delivering mate. But back in the game, he played rook takes f5, and it leads to the same thing because he can only throw in like a spy check with knight takes d3 to avoid mate. But in the game, he played bishop to f5, and then queen to g7 is checkmate. Good game by Mori. Could have been a little sharper on the tactics in some areas, but otherwise a very good attack. Patience and persistence paid off for him. All right, let's get on to our next game fragment. We join this game at move 35. Dan Burns has the white pieces. He's rated 1660, and he's up against Ethan Z. Ethan is rated 1883, so white is definitely the underdog in this, but the material is equal, and we're at move 35. We're 5 moves away from time control, and it's white to move. But black has that nasty advanced e-pawn, and it looks like it's doom for white. But it's not really. If you'd like to pause the video, see what you can come up with. Well, let me tell you what, let me flip the board. So it's white to move. Can you find a way for white to draw the game? Go ahead and pause the video and see what you can come up with. Okay. In the game, Dan played queen to d3, and we'll get to that in a moment. But the saving line was queen takes c6. Black would probably now continue with rook to f2. I mean, mate threats cause your opponents to do weird things. So queen e6, king h7, rook takes f2. Now, pawn takes f2 doesn't do a whole lot for black, so he's got to try queen takes, king h2. And now if he goes e2, we go knight to d3, and we'll come back to this in a moment. But after queen f4 check, king h1, queen f1, king h2, I think that all you're going to get out of this is a draw, with queen f4 check. Because if he tries e2, we have knight to d3, and I mentioned this a moment ago, this leads to a draw as well. Because if he tries queen to d1, here's another interesting position to look at. How does white continue to hold the draw here? There's really only one way that I know of. Now go ahead and pause the video and see what you can come up with. Remember, queen and knight endings are notoriously tricky for the defender. Alright, that last comment was a bit of a hint. Knight to e5. You stop defending, you start attacking. So now if he promotes, queen to g6, king g8, and he can't get out of the perpetual. You can try this, but now this is a different perpetual. If he goes to h6, that would make white very happy with queen to g6 mate. So king h8, and we just can repeat the position until the cows come home. Okay, so that was it. Queen takes c6 gives white very good drawing chances, and as far as I can tell with best play, it is a draw. But let's flip the board one more time. Now that we have assumed control of the black pieces, let's get on with the game continuation. Queen to d3 was played by Dan, and this is a blunder. We just saw the saving grace he had. Why does this lose? And it loses by force. Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can find the solution for black to close the game out. Hopefully you paused the video and you took time to find rook to f2. And this wins because mate is threatened and he has to deal with that pronto. So rook takes, queen takes. Now king to h1 or h2, doesn't really matter. Queen to d2. Hitting the queen and hitting the knight, and if white takes the queen, the pawn cannot be stopped at the d1 square. So it's resignable at this point because the knight on b4 is hit as well. At this point, Dan must have been really frustrated and he played king to g3. Now, after queen takes b4, another mistake, but it's already too late. Queen takes e3, and after knight f5 check, Dan resigned. Oh, what a twist! He could have drawn with queen takes c6. Instead, queen to d3 leads to a dead lost position. Alright, that's it for this fragment. Let's see what's next on our hit parade. Our final fragment for round 2 is the game between Patrick Schaefer, who is rated 1061, versus Li Fan. I don't know that Li has a rating, but we joined this game at move 14, where black plays bishop to h3. But let's step back. Sometimes some players have a fear of this fianchettoed bishop on g2, and it unnerves them. I don't know why, but some players are like that. And it seemed like this was black's plan. He just wanted to get rid of that bishop one way or the other. But playing bishop to h3 does not force the trade of the bishop. You should respect the fianchettoed bishop, but never fear it. Never fear it. With his mind made up, he went bishop to h3. And by doing so, he misses a little tactical melee. It takes some calculation, but it's there. I think he needed to try e takes d4. Okay, this hits the knight on c3, and so he's got to deal with that. If he plays e takes d4, black can play knight takes c3, and the knight on e2 is pinned, so after bishop or queen takes c3, then the knight on e2 is underprotected. So white has to play knight takes d5. Knight takes d5. And now he cannot take on d4 with the pawn because the knight is underprotected on e2. And he can play bishop takes on d4, but if he does that, he plays this, then black will recapture, and then white's got to recapture one way or the other. If he takes with the pawn there, the knight drops to rook takes knight. If he takes it with the queen, the bishop takes the knight free and clear. And if he takes with the knight, the rook on d1 falls to the bishop on g4. So there's all these little tiny factors that are there with the bishop on g4, not when it's on h3. e4 here is probably the best try for white. After pawn takes on c5, now the problem is if he takes the knight, then rook takes e2 is winning for black. And if b takes c5, then rook a d8. Black is very well centralized and he has a lot of scope for his pieces. Now if knight takes d4, bishop takes d1. We've already talked about that. So f3, and f3 stuns his own fianchettoed bishop. Knight to e3, rook to e1, knight to c4. Queen moves, we take the bishop, takes back, d3. Queen to b1. The queen was hit by the bishop on g7, and now pawn takes the knight. And we can just see that this is easily winning for black here. I mean, he might try and complicate things with either rook to a2, bishop to e6, black's up a piece and a pawn, or f takes g4, queen to d4 check, king moves, and queen takes a1. And after this, he's up a rook and a pawn. So yeah, back here, black missed the chance to spring open some tactics. All right, bishop h3 was played, And now white should play d takes e5 and then follow that up with e4 with an equal game. But he plays bishop h1. And now black should play e4 and black would have a slightly better game. But he messed up and he played queen to f5, which is an obvious mistake to most of us because of e4, forking the queen and knight. Queen to g4 was played, and now f3 was played. Going back, e takes d5 was a clean and simple way to go about business, just picking up the piece. Going back to the game, f3 was played, queen h5, and now white should play e takes d5. And he's up a piece with a good game. In the game, for some reason, Patrick played knight takes d5. Don't ask me why. And now black should continue with c takes d5, e takes d5 with total equality. Getting back to our game, he did not play that. He played bishop to h6. And this is a very bad blunder, to which white played queen to d3. Let's take a step back. Do you see it, folks? Yeah, of course. He should have played knight takes f6, forking the king and the queen. Both players missed that. And now c takes d5. He gets rid of the knight. Phew! That was a close call. E takes d5. And bishop f5. Okay, we have to close out part 2 of the Brilliance or Blunders video with ambiguity. White went on to win. I don't know how, but he went on to win. But the game score is incomplete at this point. So it might be that taking on f6 wasn't even possible. Maybe this position isn't even correct. But if it is, that's a doozy of a double blunder to miss the knight fork on f6. Alright, folks, I hope you found these game fragments entertaining and worthy of your comments and high pawn votes. If you like the videos, please, by all means, leave a comment or vote at least, and let me know what you think. Alright, that's it for now, folks. Until next time, good luck.